Good morning, everybody. Sorry, I was monitoring the stream. I forgot to turn it back down. But good morning, everybody, and happy Friday for those of you that are new. Welcome. And for those of you that are returning, welcome back to the Torque and Thrust Talk Show, episode number 19, Green Practice or Publicity. My name is Bill, and I've been an airline pilot for the past 7 years. I hold 5 FAA type ratings and currently fly the Boeing 737 for a major U.S. airline. My co-host is fellow co-founder of the Three Green Simulations Group, retired NYC EMT, and flight sim extraordinaire Tommy D. of Level Flight Simulations. On this week's show, we are talking about new flight slots in Washington, D.C.'s Reagan Airport, gaming news with Starfield and Hell Let Loose, and EV, or electrical vehicle, mineral mining in China. Then we'll learn industry terms with jargon in a jiffy, learn from past accidents with our new segment, Safety Stand Down, live listener Q&A, and our discussion this week, Going Green, a sustainable practice or just publicity. Tommy D, how are you doing this morning?
I'm doing well. Bill. How about yourself?
I am not doing too bad. Been another busy week of me being at home. Like I said, I don't know if I said it on stream or not, but previously just got bought off a trip, which just basically means there is a newer first officer trying to do their training. So I got paid to stay home while they took my place on the trip. Dealt with some trespassing irrigation service technicians earlier this week. Had to buy my first private property sign because apparently that's not implied with the fenced-in backyard. I was texting Tommy about this the other day. It's something that got me really fired up because I couldn't understand why they couldn't understand how that was not okay to be jumping in my backyard without my permission. But a lot of cool stuff. I did some work on my Twitch overlays, and then also created a cool thumbnail for our show this morning. So it's been a lot of positive stuff with digital media. So I've overall, it's been a great week. How about you?
About the same. Kind of an odd week at work. Just a lot of situations we didn't have to deal with before because they're in the process of switching things.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Now you've heard about it for weeks and weeks and weeks, but my transfer did get approved to a new site, which
Mm-hmm.
is going to bring me closer. I'm just waiting for the official offer letter, and once I get that, sign it. I get shipped to another site for 2 weeks, and then I go to my new building. So that's
Outstanding.
pretty
That's awesome.
exciting.
And it's
And
closer, right?
yeah, I'm going from a 24-minute drive to about 6. I'll actually be
Oh,
working right up the road from my better half.
that's easy. Easy.
Oh
That
yeah.
commute, I know it sounds silly, but like I went from a 10 to 15 minute commute where I used to live to a 20-minute commute. And 5 minutes doesn't sound a lot, but 5 minutes of driving is a lot.
Well,
You know
the
what I mean?
timing
So,
couldn't be better because the interstate, here we are at the beginning of spring, the weather's starting to get nice out. So
mhm.
all the road work and asphalt companies that are contracted by the state got their budget infusion. So we know it's going to be happening all day and all night on the roads. So I get to
Oh, you mean
avoid
the
all the
construction?
traffic. Yeah.
Oh, I gotcha. Yeah, same thing up on the north side of town. The fall project is to be resurfacing that road, and it's already a terrible intersection as it is. So yeah, it's a kind of a blessing in disguise on my end too, moving to the south side of town away from all that madness. So but that's good. Like I said, very productive week. I go back to work tomorrow, so I won't be streaming for the next couple days. So Tommy will have to take up the slack on his on his Twitch and his side of things with the gaming streaming.
I got a fun
So
flight planned for tomorrow. I got a special livery and everything.
there you go. We'll have talk about that in your gaming update, so everybody knows what's
Oh
coming and
no,
what's to
that's a
look forward
total
to.
surprise. That's
Oh,
as
is
much
it?
as
Then
people get to
why
know.
did you why did you mention it? You're just teasing them.
Pretty much.
Okay, well, tease them some more in your segment. But starting off this morning, I will be doing some aviation news. And today we're going to be talking about a couple different things. Usually we start off with this week in aviation, where we go back in history. I'm a huge history buff, so I love talking about history. So starting us off this week in aviation history was April 30th in 1917. The Pacific Aero Products Company changes its name to Boeing Airplane Company with William E. Boeing as its president. So it used to be the Pacific Aero Products, so you called it Aircraft Company back in the day. And they were kind of a conglomerate between Boeing Aircraft, or it was a aircraft manufacturing, and they also flew or it worked with Varney Airlines, which eventually became United. But they all worked together to make airplanes and run airmail, and that's what and that's one of the first monopolies that got broken up by the U.S. federal government. They said you can't do that, so they split, and then eventually, like I said, became the Boeing company that we know today. And it's a good piece of history, 1917, because obviously Boeing is all over the news right now. Now, I did check into some updates on the 787 and 737 whistleblower. The only real update, and it's more scrutiny or I guess speculation than anything, is there was a mysterious death of one of the previous whistleblowers. Believe he developed some sort of infection, then died unexpectedly. So that's kind of, but we're not really going to talk about that because I'm looking for more hard, concrete testimonies and evidence and stuff like that. So once we do get an update on it, it will be presented on the show. But right now, there is no recent update. But what we are talking about today in aviation news is the Senate passed an FAA bill which added 5 flight slots from Washington Reagan National Airport. I know that's like, why does that matter? You got to understand, Washington Reagan, since it's smaller, it's kind of like LaGuardia, had very specific numbers of aircraft that they could allow into the airport. And there was also a limit, a cap on how far those airplanes could travel. Because back in 1960s when they first came up with this rule, they were trying to limit the size of the airplanes coming out of that airport for noise abatement, which ironically, we fly the River Visual or the Vernon Visual going in there, so it's not like we're causing noise anyways. But that's something we can discuss later. It's the same thing with John Wayne in Orange County. The same people that are calling 5 times a day to complain about the noise from the airport are the same people that would complain about not having airline service out of John Wayne and complain about the traffic on the drive to LA. Hypocrites. Anyways, let's talk about this a little bit more. I digress. So the FAA approved 5 new slots for DCA for longer flights, aiming to lower ticket processing and increase competition. The perimeter rule at DCA limits flights lengths due to noise pollution, and the new bill allows the Senate. The new bill allows the Senate slots to be used for flights longer than 1,250 nautical miles, which was the previous limit. This is done to bring in more travel seats available to the public from the West Coast, such as like San Francisco and LAX. So rather than flying in Dulles, they could go directly into DCA. And it's also, here we go, aimed to allow more competition against United Airlines, because right now, if you want to do a transcon from the West Coast to the East Coast, you're going to have to fly into Washington Dulles, because previously those slots were outside of the limitation of those aircraft. So if you're like American want to do, they would have to fly you somewhere. So DFW to Philly and then up to meet that criteria. But this new rule that they passed would allow other airlines to compete, because United does have a large hub in Dulles, but it would allow them to compete with that and aim that at United. So that way it allows other aircraft to fly directly into DC or Washington Reagan, excuse me. So the original distance limit, a little bit of history about it. The original distance limit was issued in January of 1966 to limit noise pollution by restricting flights of smaller aircraft that would fly shorter distances. The first rule was 650 miles, which back then for aviation, that's pretty far. Then it was 1,000 miles in 1981, and then 1,250 miles in 1986, and that's what it's been since 1986. So if I'm doing quick math there, 24, so that's about 38 years. Yeah, 38 years that it's lasted like that. Now, LaGuardia is the same way. LaGuardia, for noise abatement and also size, LaGuardia is not a very big airport, has a 1,500 nautical mile rule as well. So it's kind of similar to that. Now, as of right now, the slots awards have not been determined yet, so we don't know who's going to get them. I'm not entirely sure what the bidding process is per se on how to get those slots, but the airlines do bid for it, for the service and what service they're going to provide, and then the government and the authority, whoever governs the Washington Reagan, will decide who gets those slots. By the sound of it, I don't think it's going to be United. It sounds like this is driving competition against United to allow people and other airlines to fly people long distance from the West Coast into Washington Dulles other than United. So I don't think it's going to be United, but it'll be interesting to see who actually gets awarded those slots. And I'll bring in Tommy here just to talk a little bit about opinions on that, because that is kind of an interesting rule, wouldn't you think? The limiting distances.
I do. That is kind of an interesting rule, and all of a sudden now, why? Like, what's what else do we not know about? Like, why are you going to limit a distance? Why are you going to like start implementing these changes after it's gone so long the way it has been? You know, is it
Yeah,
changing the culture of the, well, this is just the way we always did it, you know?
yeah. Well, and that's the thing. I think that's the thing is, it's largely the people that are complaining about the noise, because if you have lighter jets, they're quieter per se. But once again, it's probably the same people that are complaining about not being able to fly direct on a different airline that's maybe cheaper or better options for from the West Coast. Like I said, it's
It
just like
probably
Orange
is.
County. It's just like
It,
Orange County. The people that are complaining about the noise are the same people that would complain if airlines pulled out of there because they would have to drive to LAX. It's a double edged sword.
it is. And now you see, growing up outside of Kennedy, and literally when I tell you I was just outside Kennedy, it would take
Hmm.
us about 20 minutes to walk from my front door to airport property, like
Oh, you're
going in the
right
back
there.
way by, yeah, by long-term parking. And
Yeah.
I remember as a kid, there was an old sewage treatment plant that they had bought when it was Idlewild Airport for noise abatement rules. Now, this is back when the DC-6s and all that
Oh wow. Yeah.
started,
That's
you
yeah.
know, and then it got renamed Kennedy. But I mean, every Wednesday and Sunday, the Concorde would literally fly over our house on final.
The
And
Concorde.
I'll be honest with you, I sleep right through it. I would legitimately sleep right through it. After a while, being that close to Kennedy, I didn't even hear him anymore. You know, it
Yeah,
just
you do.
became such
Yeah.
a part. You don't hear it. So I understand the noise abatement, but what's everybody moaning and groaning about? Because I'm not the only person that grew up outside of an airport.
Yeah. I mean, when I first moved to Chicago, I also lived on 1,000 feet, or like 1,000 feet on final for 2-8 Center. That's where I lived. Right. So I'm very familiar, but like you said, you kind of get used to it and stuff like that. But ironically, the neighborhood I would walk past every time I was working out, is I would I'd be walking past this sign. It's for like the village council or whatever it is, and it's like um, what would it say? It's like submit your complaints. You know, the noise, blah blah. I'm like, I'm pretty sure this neighborhood did not exist before O'Hare. You know, I'm not entirely sure, but I'm pretty sure it wasn't that, right? I'm pretty sure O'Hare came first. So you purposely settled next to an airport. You know what I mean? Like,
Right.
why are you all complaining about noise? Now, granted, I understand it can be a nuisance, but don't move. It's like having a house right next to a train tracks, right? If you buy the house next to the train tracks, you know the train tracks are there, or even like an HOA. I've dealt with this when I was an HOA president in my old neighborhood. You know going in that that is part of the deal. So don't complain about it when the train's honking at 3 a.m. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
that's
And
just I digress. It's just it kind of I hate the hypocrisy.
it,
That's
it
one of
it's really
my
is almost
big things.
hypocritical, isn't it?
It is, yeah, because it's they knowingly submitted to something that they knew that they are now complaining about. You know what I
Right.
mean? So
And
it's
you know, if
silly.
I had the chance, I'd live next to Kennedy again. It don't bother me. Where I am now, and you're familiar with the geography of where I live because you would fly past my
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
house coming into 22.
Yep.
So,
Mm-hmm.
and now the largest aircraft that uh, they handle at the moment is an A320 by
Yep.
American.
Yeah.
But we're going to be getting Breeze 190s, a lot of Cessna citations, a lot of general aviation traffic. And
Yeah.
depending on the pattern that they're in, they literally turn for final right above the house that I live in
Yep.
now. You know,
Yep. And it's
so
also and there's very limited, especially where you live because of the terrain. It's very limited on how we can maneuver to be able to reduce noise.
yeah,
So
I'm in the mountain basin. So
yep, it's just like going to State College, PA. It's in a valley. It's in a
yep,
rising valley. You can't do anything. Like you're stuck going down the valley to get to the runway. So, but anyways, that's something we can talk about too. I mean, it kind of goes into today's theme. We're talking about going green and the environment and noise and stuff like that. That's, I mean, we can talk about maybe in the discussion about noise abatement and stuff like that. But
I have notes for
it's
that
definitely
actually.
interesting. Oh, do you? Perfect.
Oh
So we'll
yeah.
talk about it at the end of the show. So make sure you guys stay tuned. We'll talk about that a little bit more. But with that, I'm going to hand it over to Tommy. Tommy is going to be talking about some really cool gaming news. And don't forget the teaser. All the chat, everybody wants to know the teaser about your flight tomorrow. So take it
Okay.
away, Tommy.
Thanks, Bill. So we're going to start off today with a quick update on Starfield. Now, this game came out a couple months ago, and it was a very large open map. We actually showcased it on the show and discussed it. I think it was episode 4 or 5. Um, Open map space genre type game where you go, you explore, you can build outposts, um, you deal with NPC to get your missions complete, and the more further you go, the further you're going to basically build your space community. It's a great game, but there were some problems. On release, one of the problems, the biggest moan and groan, and if we said it once, we said it 1,000 times on this talk show, to a gamer, frame rates are everything. A couple people that I know that played it off live, like, had complained right off the bat that the FPS were in the drain. They It was very laggy, it was slow, like loading, and it always seemed like your computer was constantly buffering to keep up with what was going on. Well, that has become a thing of the past. Update 4 released on May 1st for Starfield. Just to give you guys kind of what's going on, within the first 30 to 40 game hours of Starfield and its initial release, within 30 to 40 game hours, they lost 35% of the gaming community playing that game because of the frame rates. To those of you who are in the chat that are not gamers, 30 to 40 hours game time, a lot. That is a lot of um hours sitting in front of your computer playing the game. So, with the update, whatever it is they did, they have a frame rate fix. So now they're running 80 to 120 frames per second, which is great. If you got a system that can handle 120 frames per second, you are doing well. One of the other things that they brought into that the gaming community for Starfield was moaning and groaning about was to customize their own ship. They didn't want to use a base model ship. You know, if I buy the game and I want my flight deck to look like an X-wing, that's what I want. I paid for it. Well, like ATS, Starfield, Bethesda Gaming actually listened, and now you can customize to a degree your own ship. Some of the other things they did also was they updated terrain and structures, utility management, like as far as how much you can accrue and savings, basically to purchase goods and services as the game goes. With that, since May 1st, they're looking at a 22% increase in gamership, which that's not bad considering losing 35% within the first 30 to 40 hours of playing that game. That is a lot. Um, this was the knockout punch of updates for this game, and they didn't really go too far deep into it. There was a Reddit article that I had read about it. They're already working on the next update to keep the frame rate improvisations going, but it's also there's going to be more and more big changes. More inventory management, and just better overall visual gameplay. So those of us who stream, we know that we kind of go out of the way to make sure it looks pretty, and that's why a lot of people you see stream they use Microsoft Flight Simulator as opposed to X-Plane, because X-Plane flight dynamics are a lot better, but Microsoft Flight Sim is just pretty. So that's pretty much everything for Starfield that I have today. The second thing that I just wanted to touch on, as you guys realized, Bill and I started playing Hell Let Loose this week. Interesting game. I am a big fan of the World War II genre first person shooters. There's a lot of the game. I'm going to update it again probably within a month's time. I'm still learning it. It is very, very involved. The graphics are okay. I'm hitting 110 frames per second, depending on the server, because it's kind of a battlefield type server system where you gotta log in to certain servers. Personally, Bill and I have been using the ones that say new players welcome, and the community itself has actually been really cool. It's a very instructive community. There's not a lot of toxicity, and one thing that pops up in the screen is if someone is suspected of cheating, they actually ask you, "Do you suspect player XYZ of cheating with, a wall hack or an aimbot or something like that?" If it is legitimate, and because apparently there are moderators that monitor this game 24/7, depending on where the servers are located, because it's a worldwide server system. Yeah, they kind of disappear a couple of minutes after that if they see whatever evidence that they need. So I was kind of looking into that. They didn't publish a whole lot. Their anti-cheat software pops up when you launch the game, but there's not a lot of information about it. So, which leads me to believe that their anti-cheat software is not third party, it's proprietary, just licensed under a different name, probably for tax reasons. In ending, tomorrow at noon Eastern time, we all know, we've all seen the TikTok of um my shelving and stuff like that. And I am a Star Wars nerd. I am lucky enough to have seen the original twice in the movie theater back in 1977. And tomorrow being May the 4th be with you, I do have a flight lined up, noon Eastern time. I got a special library. I got a special call sign. You guys are just going to have to tune in and see what it is. I will be on TikTok and Twitch. So there we are, Bill.
And unfortunately, I won't be available. I'll be working, unfortunately. But I will definitely go back and look. So definitely check that out tomorrow at noon Eastern time. It's 11 a.m. Central on Tommy D's. Are you just doing it on Twitch or on YouTube as well? We're going live.
I'm having some problems with Restream. So as it stands right now, just TikTok and Twitch.
Okay. Yeah. Let me know next week. I'll set you up with Multicaster or the Multicast on OBS. It seems to run a little bit smoother. But definitely go check
Okay,
out
cool.
Tommy on Twitch at Level Flight Simulations is his gamer tag / Twitch name. He'll be streaming that tomorrow. And yeah, we played Hell Let Loose for the first time a couple days ago. It's like playing Battlefield in terms of the learning curve. We got killed a lot. And I think that was the most frustrating thing is the amount of times we got shot and killed without even seeing who was shooting us. It was even to the point where I just became a medic and I was running around helping heal my teammates because I couldn't do it. That was the only way I was effective.
Yeah, and more to your point, now, if we were in Modern Warfare 3, we'd be moaning and groaning about the campers. There is quite a bit of camping
on camping. Yeah.
Yeah, there is. And people who level up enough and they unlock that sniper class, you know, you're not going to see them. Like some of these guys are really pretty decent at keeping themselves hidden, and that's what frustrates me more.
Yeah, and there's no gamer tags over the enemy. It's realistic. Like you can't. It's like, oh wait, is that a? And then a lot of times when I was able to kill somebody in game, it was out of surprise. I was like, wait, is that a? Oh my god! And that's you can go watch that stream on my side. It was a lot of surprise moments, or the time that I thought I was tossing a grenade, but ended up underhanding it in front of myself for like 3 feet in a trench.
I did the same thing last night.
Yeah, so I that's left trigger. I accidentally underhanded a grenade right in front of me and then went screaming down the trenches. So Hell Let Loose is definitely something that I'm trying to incorporate. I don't know if it's going to stay in my stream repertoire, but we will see. One thing that I think will find its way in is Starfleet. Or sorry, not Starfleet, Starfield. Starfield, I didn't have space on my hard drive for that game when it first came out. Now I have an extra 2 terabytes with space, so I may download it and give it a try because it's something I've always wanted to try. So may reintroduce that into my streaming content. Actually, after the show, I'll be downloading that as well. But thanks, Tommy, for the gaming updates. I will now be doing some automotive news. It actually kind of has to do with the green theme, as you can tell. Green lights, green ticker tape. Our thumbnail green. We're talking about green today, sustainability, especially because this last week on April 26th was Earth Day. So that's what kind of gave me, that's kind of what gave me the idea. But what we're talking about in automotive news is we are currently talking about the final U.S. rule from Automotive News that extends the timetable for critical mineral resourcing or sourcing in EVs tax credit eligibility. So basically what there is right now is to be able, there's incentives for car makers to be able, and like tax breaks to be able to get tax credits for making EVs, as well as consumer tax breaks for owning and operating an EV. Those things are absolutely essential according to the Biden administration, to meet their climate change goals, right? We're not arguing climate change necessarily, because I know there's like flat Earth. There's all sorts of arguments about it. But the point is we're trying to move towards clean energy. And once again, we'll be talking about this later in a full-blown discussion. That's what we're talking about today. But what's changed is that China, Russia, North Korea, North Korea, obviously, we don't have any trade with them. And Russia and China, there's specific minerals that you need for EV production for the batteries. And so now that sourcing is limited, which means there's now a huge shortage of EV material to make the batteries, because we're not, there's a ban on trade with China, Russia, and North Korea. So it's important that they extend these tax credits, because without them, or tax eligibility credits for EV stuff, because without them, the climate change plan and the move towards EVs and a smaller carbon footprint kind of just gets halted in the water. So that's where we're at right now with automotive news. Like I said, automotive news, depending on the week, sometimes it's solid, sometimes it's like, but this one was pretty interesting because it actually had to do with what we're talking about today with green sustainability and energy. Another thing we can discuss too is the habitat or the effects on the environment to mine said EV minerals for EV batteries. Right, we'll talk about that. It's called carbon displacement versus carbon reduction, but we'll talk about that a little bit later. So a very, very short. I'll bring Tommy back here. A very short segment with that, unfortunately, but that's all there is today for automotive news. Now, up next, our favorite segment, and I don't think it's going anywhere until we run out of terms, but our favorite segment of all time, Jargon in a Jiffy. For those of you that are new to the show, Jargon in a Jiffy is a word game that is played on the podcast where Tommy picks a term from his career history, and I will pick a term from my career as an airline pilot. We present the word, we say it in a sentence, and it's up to the other host to guess the definition of the word. And sometimes we get it, and sometimes we just absolutely stump each other. So without further ado, I'm going to let Tommy D take this one away. So Tommy, what is your Jargon in a Jiffy for this week?
My jargon in a jiffy is a little bit more than just one word. This week is ride the lightning.
Oh, easy. I think. Wait, hold on. Okay, I say easy because I think it means different things depending on which public service career field you're in.
Right, and remember, I am not a corrections officer, so you can wipe that one out.
Okay, so go ahead and use your sentence.
Bill, step back. I'm going to push the button and make this guy ride the lightning.
Okay, that's when you're shocking somebody with the AED with the paddles.
Yeah, it is. It is
clear.
Relatively simple, but I'll tell you how I came up with it this week. I was leaving for work about 15 minutes early because I had to get gas, and it was an ambulance sitting outside front of my house. It was two friends that I used to work, and they were like, "Oh, hey, what are you doing?" They were going to knock on the door and come say hello, and they were actually returning to the station out of service from a cardiac arrest, and one of the guys literally turned around and would you believe that's with the window closed?
That's with the window closed, really?
That's with the window closed. And he turned around. He looked at me. He looked at me and he was like, "Brother, man, this dude rode the lightning 7 times." I'm like, "Oh,
7 times? Is there a limit? Like a human
limit?
Unlimited. How many times?
You just there's
keep
no
shocking
limit.
them until.
In all reality, about 8 times.
And they're still not coming back?
Yeah, 8 times. It's not coming. Like the heart and everything, it's in the myocardium. So when you get to 6, 7, 8 times with that amount of electricity, we pretty much fried it.
Oh, man. God. Okay, so for other people, I'm seeing in our TikTok chat, people are talking about, wait a second, ride the lightning. So the other phrase is if you're a law enforcement officer, is when you tase somebody using a less lethal or non-lethal, I shouldn't say less lethal, non-lethal form of deterrence, such as a taser. When you get shot with one of those, that's called riding the lightning because is it 50,000 volts?
50,000.
50,000 volts that basically render you useless, basically. So if you're trying to run from a police officer, not comply, stuff like that, or to defuse a situation without using lethal force, getting shot with one of those tasers is called riding the lightning. So that's why when you said that, I was like, hold on, time out from your career field, right?
Yep. Yeah.
Oh, that was a good one. I like that one. Riding the lightning. All right. I'm trying to think. No? There is no riding the lightning in my career field.
I hope
Because
not.
you would. Yeah, I would say because you'd literally. I've been struck by lightning, but we don't call that riding lightning. All right. So my word for this week is, or I guess it's an acronym. I do more acronyms than anything. Is SOV. Sierra Oscar Victor. SOV. Part of my task when starting the engines on the 737 is verifying both engine and spar fuel SOVs operate correctly. SOV.
Oh. Yeah, I know. I wrote it down. You notice me like
Oh,
looking down. I got my
yeah.
little. Yeah. Can you repeat the sentence again?
Yep. Part of my task when starting the engines on the 737 is verifying both the engine and spar fuel SOVs operate correctly. And this is actually a pretty common term. SOV is one of the acronyms that like I've heard on almost every airplane that I've been on. So it's a very common thing across jet aircraft.
Okay, so right off the top of my head, it's a valve.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I feel I should know this.
You're probably gonna beat yourself up when you hear it. It's pretty straightforward, but it's a technical term. And we have SOVs. It's not only fuel. There's SOVs in with the bleed air system, with pressurization, hydraulics. There's SOVs on all systems. It's not specific to the fuel system, if that helps. That's the best sentence I could come up with without going into a technical dissertation about the 737.
What you're going to do when we're done with the live anyway, because you piqued my curiosity.
While we're playing Starfield.
Right?
Okay, so what does a valve do? Right, you're right. It is the V is a valve.
It's a shutoff valve.
There you go. Yeah, so it's a fuel shutoff valve. So there's hydraulic SOVs, there's fuel SOVs, there's bleed air SOVs, high stage, low stage SOVs. I can't remember on the CRJ, there was some weird SOV, but there's a bunch of SOVs. It just stands for shutoff valve. Is exactly what it is. All it is a valve that opens and closes. Depends on the valve in the system, because everything when it fails is failed to what's it called? Failed to the most conservative position is the engineering term, I think. So failed to the most conservative position. So like, for example, if it's a hot air source, like a bleed air thing, and it fails, the design may be that it fails shut. So that way for it to open is either electric. So like it could be electrically activated. It could be pneumatically activated where the air pushes it open, or it can be mechanically activated. So SOV is just a generic term for shut off valve. So you got it though.
Nice.
That was
well,
good.
You know what sparked it?
What?
When you said, "What does a valve do?"
Yeah,
and it doesn't matter where it is. You know, it could be a plumbing valve. It shuts.
Correct.
It opens and closes.
It shuts off.
That's it.
That's the purpose.
Actually did it.
Yeah, and we don't call it an SOV, but like the APU has an isolation valve. What does it do? All it is a valve that splits the left side of the aircraft's pneumatic system from the right side. That's it. That's all that SOVs do. So there you go though. That's perfect. It's something as simple, but it has so many different uses in aviation. That's why it was kind of an important one.
And those of you in our chat today, Bill will be explaining this in depth to the point to where I understand it, because you would be surprised how much I've learned about the 737 just in the sim from Bill and I talking offline, because there's rarely a day that goes by where we don't talk for at least a half hour, an hour about life in general, or gaming or something.
Or like something will pop up like a really bad maintenance delay, like a couple weeks ago in Houston, remember?
And
I texted you and I was like, yep, that was a return to gate. And of course, after we get to gate, doors open stuff. I'm not texting Tommy while I'm flying an airplane. I don't even text my wife, right? My phone's off in my bag when I'm flying. But I get back and I'm like, hey, we had to return to gate for a impending or a bypass filter light on the fuel. And Tommy's like, what is that? So basically, there's a fuel filter, right, where the fuel goes through, collects all sorts of contaminants and metal that may have come from the engine and stuff before it gets to the actual engine to prevent damage. Well, when we get impending or a fuel bypass filter light, what that means is the filter is clogged and there's a little valve, right, a little shutoff valve that opens up and allows raw fuel to go directly to the engine to try to sustain it. But in the checklist, it says if you're on the ground, don't take off. In the air, it says engine may shut down. type of deal, because
Oh,
it gets clogged up and like a bunch of crap gets in there and the engine will just do a shutdown on its own. So like that day I was sitting there, it was a like 5-6 hour delay, and I was just texting Tommy and he was just asking questions
yeah.
back and forth, and I was like, oh, this is what this is, this is what I'm talking about, blah blah blah. So yeah, we take opportunities to learn very seriously, which is the point of this podcast. And speaking of which, that's a really good transition here to our new segment this for the podcast. This is replacing the career corner section. For those of you that are new, go through episodes 1 through 16, I believe. And we, every episode around this time, around 40 minutes, 45 minutes, Tom and I talked about the building blocks to start your career going from zero to hero as an airline pilot and as a medical professional like an EMT. So if you're curious about those career fields and want to know how to get into them, you got to go all the way back to episode 1. And if you want just a fast forward, it's around 40-minute mark on every episode called Career Corner, and episodes 1 through 16 talk about that. But replacing that now is going to be the safety stand down. And what we're going to do, it's also another educational type thing, is we're going to learn from past transportation accidents. I say transportation because it's not always going to be aviation. So it could be trains, it could be commercial trucks, it could be shipping. We're going to learn about all of it, because the best way, especially unfortunately in the aviation industry, to learn about safe practices is by learning about others' either non-safe practices or accidents that occurred, right? And so we're going to take it all the way back to the very first aviation accident in history, which it was September 17th, 1908 in Fort Myers, Florida, of all places. So this has to do with the Wright Flyer. This comes from WrightBrothers.org. So Orville Wright took Lieutenant Thomas Selfridge flying. So at the time, they were down there at the, aviation was still new. The British had taken a huge interest in aviation in the Wright Flyer. The U.S., not so much. I think on the previous episode, I said hoax. I didn't mean a hoax. The U.S. government thought it was a gimmick for the longest time. They're like, yeah, it's like flying a kite. It's not great. The British were like, we want one. So around 1908, they're starting to get, the government's getting more interested for, air power in the military and stuff like that. So Orville is down in Fort Myers doing a demonstration for the military. He takes up Lieutenant Thomas Selfridge, demonstrating the Wright Flyer to the U.S. military. The flight started off normally with Orville maneuvering around the area, and then suddenly the propeller split. I believe it was the left one, if I'm not mistaken. And as Orville attempted to shut down the engine, the broken propeller caught the aircraft rigging, holding the tail of the aircraft in place. And the Wright Flyer, nosedived because it broke off the tail and hit the ground nose first. So Orville suffered a broken leg, ribs, and a broken back, which, from what I understood reading on the website, it's something that basically pained them until the day he died. So it was a very serious injury. And unfortunately, Lieutenant Thomas Selfridge died as a result of that accident on the operating table. So in history, Lieutenant Thomas Selfridge was the first victim of aviation, which is, and I learned that in college. Now, the big thing that we're going to talk about, obviously, as we go on through time and talk about accidents, it's going to become more complex. We're going to present it, and also the NTSB findings, because the furthest back I could find NTSB reports was like 1960. So anything before that's just research. But then we're going to talk about what we learned from it and how it changed the industry. Now, this one, the big takeaway from this was the first aviation accident. So you got to understand, 1903, the first powered flights started really around 1904. There was a year in there where the Wright brothers kind of took off a year redesigning stuff, so there wasn't a whole lot of aviation. And really, the golden age of aviation didn't really start until 1920, somewhere around there. Because up until that point, everybody, once again, just thought it was a gimmick. But up until that point, there wasn't any real... People had died trying to learn how to fly or create gliders and stuff like that throughout history, the scientists. But nobody had really seen a non-pilot or non-aviation individual suffer as a casualty, which is where Thomas Selfridge came in. So the takeaway from this is that we started becoming aware of the dangers associated with flying in general. So we'll see that trend as we're going on. There wasn't really any takeaways from this other than that they realized that the rigging holding the tail probably shouldn't be anywhere near the propeller. And also realizing that how critical the elevator structure is. And it's still to this day. If you lose your elevator or your horizontal stabilizer, you're done. You have no way to control pitch. You could lose your rudder, you could lose ailerons, and you can still control with rotor or vice versa and counteract adverse yaw or Dutch rolling. But when you lose your elevator, That's it. You can't control pitch. The only thing that, if you still had some sort of surface back there, is you could try trimming or using power, but that's very limited to try to level it off. And this is the weird part, right? So the Wright Flyer crashed in front of the committee, the U.S. government committee, right? But despite the fatal accident, the U.S. Army said, "Yep, we're going to extend your contract." It's like, what? They extended the contract on the Wright Flyer because they believed that it would do everything that they said it would. So despite the fatal accident, they're like, the Army was like, "Yep, let's do it. We're going to extend your contract, keep building us those." So what do you think for the first aviation accident in history, Tommy?
That's actually pretty wild, and I'm gonna very sterilely make a comment. U.S. Army
Okay.
probably extended the contract because it doesn't matter what military force in the world it is. When they see something new, they already have
They
a
want it.
plan. So
Well, and at this point, they were already behind the British. And every American pilot's like, "Oh, we created aviation." But the U.S. government, for the longest time, even when they applied for patents and funding to research, they were just like, "No, sorry, it's just a gimmick." And then after the British started looking into it more and started doing business with the Wright brothers, that's when they started getting interested. They're like, "Oh, maybe we should. If the British are interested, maybe we should be too." But
hmm
but
but
it's a short. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
it was actually really, really interesting to see how it goes back. And then everything is unprecedented until it actually happens. So
Happens, especially in
the
aviation.
amount of
Yeah.
information you were able to get from this with the time frame is
hmm
interesting all in and of itself.
Yeah, there's a lot of
There's
good resources out there,
yeah,
and
and
actually,
how much
and
detail
that
that they actually put in, that they
yeah,
actually
and
found the
actually,
causation.
and then the news even mentioned in the article that the news article that was published didn't even make the front page. It was like buried onto page 3 or something of the local news in Fort Myers. So like
hmm
even back then, it wasn't a big piece of news that an airplane crashed. And like you said, we will see that as we go along. A lot of these accidents are the first of its kind, and that's what causes change in the industry. The term and the saying is that all our aviation regulations are written in blood, as morbid as that sounds, but that is true because a lot of the regulations that we see today are as a result of a fatal accident. So, for example, the 1,500-hour ATP rule was as a result of the Colgan Air crash. There was I believe it was a senator or congressman's daughter on board that died as a result of the crash. So that was one of the people that was pushed really hard for the 1,500, which it did. I mean, it improved safety. 100% behind it. I don't believe we should reduce it. I think it's a good thing to have that much time before you get into an airline job. But that just goes to show it's like things have to happen and people have to get hurt in order for the federal government to change, at least in aviation, to change rules. Because stuff pops up and you're like, "Oh, I didn't know that could happen. Let's make a rule." So that is something that we'll
hmm
see, and we'll see it evolve as we're going through this segment, in which I love. There's tons, not love the fact that there's accidents, but the fact that there's a lot to learn from previous accidents that have occurred. So there's a ton of them. So we're just going to, like I said, whether it's aviation, transportation, ships, etc., we're going to cover them all. So this segment should last a pretty long time in the future. So with that, we are now going to go over to our viewer Q&A. So if you guys are new to the talk show, you guys are more than welcome to join us on our Discord. Put it on a QR code here. If you're listening, you're like, "I can't see a QR code," that is correct because you are listening to the show. So if you go to any one of our social media, so Twitch, TikTok, YouTube, there's a link tree in there, either on Tommy's or mine, and you can click on it and there's a Discord. You can join that. Best thing about the Discord, it's free. It's always going to be free. There is no restricted access other than being a content creator, which is free to apply, free to be a verified content creator in our server, in our Discord server, but there's no paywalls, nothing. It's free. You can directly message Tommy and I, ping us, ask us questions, join us for live gaming, and so on and so forth. It's a great community to be a part of. It's called the 3 Green Simulations Group, and like I said, QR codes on the screen, or you can go check the link in our bios. Also, with that, you can also ask us questions and suggest topics for us to talk about on our live podcast. Let's see. Let's talk about some chats here. So I pinned one because this is from Caden. Fly with Kaden. He's a content creator on our Twitch, or I'm sorry, on our Discord server, and I've streamed with him on Twitch. A private pilot working on his instrument right now. He says, I guess my question is, why would you move right next to an airport thinking you aren't going to hear a plane? Good question. Good question. It's like the same people that complain about train noise even though they bought a house 2 feet away from train tracks, or people who complain about HOAs and rules when they willingly sign paperwork knowingly going into a neighborhood with an HOA. So, you see what I mean? So what do you think, Tommy? You think there should be a disclosure in there?
No, you know what you're buying.
Yeah, that's what I said.
Listen, when you found the house that you just bought, you knew where you were going.
Yeah, exactly. Like, there shouldn't be any questions about it. You know what I mean? It's like you bought this, you knew it was there. Now, if you bought a house and they built an airport later, okay, you might have a leg to stand on. But it's just one of those things. It's like it doesn't make sense. Let's see what else.
And, the funny thing is too, some of the people will be like, "Oh, I didn't think planes were going to be that loud." Really? 175,000 pounds worth of aluminum and everything else. It's going to make some noise.
It's going to make some noise. And that's even with quieter engines nowadays. It used to be way worse before noise abatement was a thing. Let's see. Hello, Connor on YouTube, one of my newer followers. I believe he's from watching all the way from Germany. So that's awesome. And then also from Kaden. Kaden just has some good comments here. Aviation is one of those fields that the best way to learn is from other people's deaths or accidents. Kind of crazy. It is. I mean, our moderator, Lando, he does a lot of cool videos on TikTok about past accidents and stuff like that. I have a huge, if I'm bored, I'll go on YouTube and watch Mayday Air Disasters and just learn. I just love the educational aspect of those shows, just to learn from other people's mistakes, right? So that I don't make them. Do you have anything on your side, Tommy?
Hello, everybody. I got a lot of that.
Yep, that's it. Yep, I would say there is a lot of hellos. So hello, everybody, our 3 Green Simulations group, and everybody who's joined us today. Like I said, in the future, if you'd like to ask us a question, actually, before I do anything, let me check TikTok here. Yep, I didn't really have any questions on TikTok. But as I said before, if you guys are watching the live show, feel free to drop all your questions into chat. It usually takes us about 40 minutes to get to the live Q&A segment, so that's when we're going to answer it. We're not ignoring you. We're just waiting until the segment to answer. So now on to our weekly discussion topic, going green. Is it a sustainable practice or is it just publicity? Now, it sounds kind of controversial, but what it's talking about is like, is there an actual sustainability? Is it actually helping the earth like we want it to? Right, because that's the whole point of sustainability. Or is this more of a publicity stunt for tax credits, for people going with businesses because they're claimed to be green, and so on and so forth? So, Tommy, what do you think? Is going green nowadays
sustainability there?
Mm-hmm.
I do think it is morphed into some massive publicity stunts, and I don't want to call it propaganda, but there are companies worldwide out there who claim they're going green and this is our 30-year sustainability plan and this, that, and the other thing, but really haven't done anything about it yet. They just kind of because it makes them more marketable. We're a company going green and we're more marketable.
Well, and that's the thing, because you were talking about your partner, and I'm the same way. I will tend to do business with a company if they are doing green initiatives, if that makes sense. That's something to me that's important. Ironically, I fly probably one of the worst pollutants, which I'll go over. I have statistics for it, that causes the most carbon emissions. But the airline I work for, they are moving, whether it's publicity or not, are moving towards a more sustainable way to fly airplanes that has less harmful on the environment. About 6 months ago to a year ago, my company actually flew from Chicago with our CEO on board, from Chicago to Newark on a MAX aircraft, and the article is kind of misleading. The article said 100% sustainable aviation fuel. That's not correct. The left tank for the left engine was 100% sustainable aviation fuel. So it was all stuff that was made from like, I don't want to say compost, but reusable stuff. And then the right engine still had the standard like 50-50 mix. So it wasn't 100%. One engine of two was operated on 100% sustainable aviation fuel.
Hmm.
So the airline that I work for is moving towards that, and that's why I work for them. I do understand the job that I work for is not green by nature, but we are actually doing, initiatives towards that. Whereas there's other companies, there's actually an article on Simple Flying too. Probably should have talked about that, but they're overseas. There's a couple airlines that are being pursued, not really pursued, but looked at by the government agencies because they're claiming to be green in certain instances, and they're finding that realistically they're not. So that's another thing is there are entities out there, whether it be government or private, that are investigating claims of false advertisement for being green in terms of airlines. So that is, at least there's people out there looking at it and making sure people are being honest to their claims about being green. So I got some stats, Tommy, if you're ready for them, because I'm a stats person.
Yeah, let's go with the stats, and then
We can talk
I'll
about
go
the
into my
stats.
little thing. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So, top 10 green countries. Okay. This is from greenmatch. I think it's .org. Talking about the top 10 most green countries. This has to do with a combination of their environmental awareness score as well as their emissions, right? Carbon emissions. Number 1 is Sweden. Number 2 is Denmark. Number 3 is the United Kingdom. 4 is Finland. 5 is France. No, I'm sorry. 5 is Switzerland. 6 is France. 7 is Costa Rica. 8 is Iceland. 9 is Norway. And ready for it, number 10, Ireland. Well, United States did not even make the top 10. You know where United States is on that list? Number 39.
Oh, I was going to
Ain't
say
even
50.
close. No, we're 39. So we're not. And I'll talk about it a little bit later with one of the other stats. So we are trending in the right direction, but we are nowhere near as environmentally conscious as the rest of the world. And also, I also want to talk about too with number bias because of the sampling. So you're talking about the United States, which is a massive country, right? We have more population than. Actually, I don't know. Sweden might be more populated than us. I don't know the exact numbers, but the point I'm trying to make is if you take an island, right? An island with 4 people versus a country with millions of people, the CO2 output and emissions or carbon footprint is going to be a lot larger than the other one. So naturally, the one with the smallest populace is going to rank at the top, if that makes sense. But but this one is also a combined score, so it takes into account per capita emissions, overall emissions, as well as consciousness and programs as well. So this is also based on what they're trying to do to remain sustainable. So let's see. And now I found another article. This is from carbonbrief.org. It says, which countries are responsible for climate change, right? Because without getting into it, climate change is a real thing. Over time, the Earth's climate does naturally change, but there has been a recent indication that because of greenhouse gases, that the change is accelerating. So, and I can see this as a pilot coming from straight, because obviously I'm not smart enough to be one of the environmental scientists, but from observational science, what I can see outside of my cockpit when I'm flying an aircraft is, and I've talked about it before, is the frequency and intensity of storms and weather. This year, the past 2 years, I've never seen so many frequent storms of such severity happen in all my career up until the past 2 years. So there is something going on. I don't know if it's a natural change like what we're expected, but scientists are saying that's not true. Scientists are saying that it is true, that climate change is just being accelerated. So what countries are responsible for climate change? This is as of 2021. So the way they measure this is carbon emissions per population, which is cumulative emissions each year divided by the number of people living in the country at the time. Number 1, ready for this? Canada. Of all places, Canada. USA is number 2. The number 3 is Estonia. Then Australia, Trinidad and Tobago, which is interesting because that's a small island in the Caribbean. Russia, Kazakhstan, United Kingdom, Germany, and Belgium. So ironically, UK is top 10 for sustainability, but UK is also one of the top contenders when it comes to CO2 or greenhouse emissions, right? And one thing to point out too is Industrial Revolution. This isn't going all the way back, but all of this pollution and stuff started back in the Industrial Revolution, way back when. So there's a little bit of blame on that too. But those are the top 10 countries with the highest carbon emissions per year. Interesting.
Yeah, I
Right?
don't know
And they
how
did.
Canada became number one on that one, but now that I
I'm
think
not.
about it a little bit more, I could understand it. Because you look at the United
Yeah.
States, right? We're spread out across the entire
Yeah.
country. Go up to Canada. Now they're spread out across the entire country as well. Like from
Yeah.
Vancouver all the way up to Montreal and up and out was it St. John's Island and all out that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Look at the northern part of Canada though. That's rough. Like you start getting way up into Canada, into that northern portion. It's almost inhabitable during the winter. So their
Yeah.
per capita is probably a lot more condensed. You
Yeah.
see
That's
where I'm going
true.
with that?
Yeah, and that's the thing. That's why this measure was pretty good because it was per capita, so it was dealing with regardless of population. If that makes sense, it was per person that was causing it. So I mean, it doesn't surprise me, and we're not going to get into it, but there's also seems to be a little bit of a political divide when it comes to going green and versus not going green.
Mm,
My big thing is not political; it's the cost. I mean, EVs are super expensive. Um, and we can talk about it now as offsetting versus actually reducing. Um, so, for example, if I buy an EV, right, electric vehicle, and I charge it at my house, well, what's providing electricity to my house? Well, what's providing, I think here is still a coal burning plant where I live, right? So I am increasing the amount of energy required coming to my home to charge my car, which thus means they're technically burning more coal, right, to provide that electricity. So more carbon emission. So that's a carbon offset, but even then, it's not. It's an offset of zero. I'm not really saving anything. Now you could talk about how long you would drive versus charge, so on versus getting gas. I'm pretty sure there's studies out there about that. But that's my point: is that green initiatives are one thing, but are we offsetting them more than anything, or are we actually reducing our carbon emissions? What do you think?
oh, I think we're offsetting.
Yeah, I don't. I don't.
We're completely offsetting. We're not the only way, and if you don't mind, the house you moved out of. I'm going to use
Mhm.
that as an example. There's
Okay.
only one way to make that house completely green. That's to go get the solar panels
Yeah. Mhm.
and cut it from the main grid.
Yep. And
Cut it
produce
from
my
the
own
main
power.
electrical grid.
Yeah. Mhm.
And that's the only way you're going to truly go green. Make the house self-sustainable on solar power. Um,
Yep. And then you'd have to do geothermal power for heat because every time you use the production of natural gas for the home
yep.
for heat and cooking, that has a carbon emission. Water, right? The water
Hmm.
facilities as well.
You
They
got to have
offput
basically a
whether it's
small treatment plant at home.
correct. Yeah, you'd have to have like a tank or a well with treatment to be
Yep.
completely sustainable, zero carbon footprint. I mean, you could do it. You could definitely do it, but you're talking about it. Was it sacrificing some of the comforts? You
You're gonna
know,
have to sacrifice some of the comforts, not as much as also sacrificing your savings account
yeah, it's
because
expensive. Yeah,
that is
so
going to
yeah,
be. You might as well just build a new house with some of the
yeah, yeah.
because
But then if you really want to dig into it, though, I need a phone for work, right? So the carbon costs or the carbon footprint of making the phone, getting it delivered, and that's another thing too is the cost and the carbon emissions and stuff that it takes for you to build the stuff, right? Solar panels have a carbon emission footprint because of how they're built. It's not fully sustainable. We talked about EVs and the batteries, mining, right? Mining the minerals for the batteries. That's detrimental to the environment,
right. So
100%.
all that mining equipment are on massive diesel engines.
Yep, mining equipment. And if you want to think about it, how does it get shipped? Via a coal burning ship, not coal burning, but diesel burning ship
Mhm.
across the entire ocean. Or on an airplane, which is burning fuel, Jet A fuel with carbon emissions. So that's my point. It's like you can go 100% green, but you're not really reducing. You're just taking almost the blame away from you and putting it on some other entity, right? So that's
Basically,
my argument. Yeah, I
it's just
understand.
shifting. That's all it is.
Yeah, And I love the intention, right? Being conscious about where we live and understanding that there are finite resources and we have to treat the planet that we are living on well, is well intentioned. But we really got to look at what is green, right? So, did you want to talk about your article? What was your article about, or that you want to talk about before
Well,
I go on to
actually,
this next
this
part?
goes back to for those of you who know, I just wrapped up my freshman year in college. A couple modules ago, I had a sustainability class, and this is exactly what it was about. Now, Bill knew about it because we were talking about it quite a bit. I basically had to raise my own city and come up with a 10-year sustainability plan. And I had done some research. Now, Bill knows where these are because I'm sure at some given point when he was with the regionals, he flew over it. 20 minutes east of me is a wind farm, and it has 14 windmills that are for electric generation through the Power and Light Company. I don't use any of that electric. That electric is shipped down to the Carolinas that it produces through
Yeah.
transmission. So they're saying, and this is what I mean by shifting. So the power company is saying, well, we're going green because we have all these fields with solar panels, we have all these wind farms, this, that, and the other thing. Okay, you're not really going green. You're just shifting your generation because if you're taking things that are in this area and shipping it 6 states south, it's got to hit a generation statement. You're still burning fossil fuel and you're still making a pretty big carbon imprint.
Which, ironically, that's what I'm going to talk about. You're talking about windmills. That's what I got here, right? Because I wanted to use an example of green energy and carbon offsetting versus carbon reduction or emission reduction. So this is from EPA, right? The EPA. So in 2021, the greenhouse gas emissions totaled 6,300 million metric tons, or 14 trillion pounds of carbon dioxide, which was a 2.3% decrease from 1990. So we are going the right direction. And then that was a further decrease from the large 15, because in 2007 we were 15.8% above the levels in 1990. Because remember, around that time, well, not only did we have the recession, but that's when we started becoming where the term green and sustainability really started, right? And then during 2008 up to 2013 with the recession, there was obviously a lower carbon emission because of the lack of production during the recession. But we're still kind of we're beneath it from the level, so it is slightly going into the right direction or correct direction. Emission contributors in order, right? The highest to the lowest. Emission contributors in the U.S., the biggest one is transportation. So buses, trucks, airplanes, ships. 28.5% is carbon emissions is attributed to transportation, and number two is electric power plants, 25%. Right. That's because a lot of them is coal burning. It's the cheapest form, because if you think about it, if you want to provide cheap energy to your clients and not bump up the prices, right, for the overhead and stuff, then you go with the cheapest one, which is coal, right? Coal is probably the dirtiest, but the cheapest one. The cleanest, but also the most dangerous, is nuclear power. Nuclear power has zero carbon emission. But as you know, Tommy, in Pennsylvania, 3 Mile Island in Harrisburg is a perfect story of what could possibly happen. Granted, it wasn't anything like Chernobyl, but it's a tale of caution to those in the future that nuclear energy is the cleanest, but it could also be the most dangerous for those that live around it. But sorry, going back to the wind energy. So is green energy really green? The offset argument. This is from Forbes magazine in 2021 from Christopher Hellman. So exactly what we're talking about, wind, right? And where you live, they put up wind turbines and say, hey, we're going green. But let's talk about how much of a carbon emission, or how much carbon emissions occur when making, shipping, and setting up one of those windmills. So wind turbines require the making of steel, concrete, fiberglass, copper, and exotic magnetic material like neodymium, and diprosium. I don't know if I mentioned those or said those right. Which
Not
all
that
have a
type of
carbon
scientist, bro.
Nope. And it's not on the periodic table, so I couldn't tell you. But they all have a carbon footprint, right? Because we talked about it, to mine it, you're disturbing the earth, you're disturbing the animals in which the natural animals that are supposed to live there, but you're also using diesel and electric engines, or sorry, diesel and gas driven equipment to mine those. So there's one. National Renewable Energy National Renewable Energy companies like Laboratory Vestas, Siemens Gamesa Renewable Energy, and Bernstein state that the majority of the turbine's carbon footprint comes from the steel, aluminum, and epoxy resins that hold pieces together. The steel tower makes up of 30% of the carbon impact, concrete foundations 17%, and the fiberglass blades 12%. Bernstein determined that the wind power turbine still has a carbon footprint of 99% less than coal-fired power plants, which is 98% less than natural gas and 75% less than solar power. So wind turbines are actually more green than solar, I guess, farm fields or solar fields. Solar power fields is what I'm trying to say, or plants. Yep. But they're also harder to capture because you have to have wind. That's the whole point. It's not you have to have wind to be able to draw power off of them. Wind turbines average just 11 grams of CO2 emissions per kilowatt hour of electricity generated versus 1,000 grams for coal. So if you're looking at it per kilowatt hour, yeah, it is a reduction, but you got to look at the overall effect of it, because if you look at only emissions from the actual thing but completely disregard how the carbon emissions it took to make them, that's just ignorance, in my opinion. That's just you're not truly being green.
Well, it's like you're fixing the numbers.
Yeah, we talked about it last
straight
week,
up
right?
Fixing numbers.
Yeah, was it last week or the week before? We were talking about the 787 whistleblower at Boeing, and that maybe there was a bias in the numbers, that they were trying to find something in the numbers that would suggest that, right? To what he was saying. It's the same thing. It's like we're going to ignore the carbon footprint that it took to build these things, right? Same thing with aviation. Yeah, aviation, when you go fully sustainable, but you look at the building practices, right? And the building, what it takes to build an airplane, that's tons of carbon emissions. So, yeah, we're operating at less, but then it takes that much to build it. Same thing with this. You have to mine stuff. You have to have steel, concrete. All that has a carbon emission associated with it. Yeah, when it's up and running, yeah, it has less CO2 emissions than burning coal, right? A lot less, but one could argue that the amount of carbon emissions that had to do with building the turbine plus its use or emissions over the lifetime of it could argue that it's almost, if not the same, as like a coal burning power plant.
Right.
And so that's kind of my point. It's not necessarily publicity per se, but it's like, are we actually doing green? Like, are we moving towards the right direction? Because that 2.3% decrease from 1990 also includes the pandemic. And the pandemic, it's just like the canals in Venice. I don't know if you remember seeing those. They were crystal clear because there's no human pollution. So are we actually seeing a 2.3% decrease from 1990? Those numbers when we first started, I guess, becoming aware of the environment. Or is it just one of those things? It's like, it's just because of the pandemic. We're just bouncing back. We're just waiting to rise those numbers.
Oh, those numbers are going to skyrocket like it's nobody's business.
And it's hard to not. It's all it is shifting, offsetting. Now, if we could change the emissions to something clean like natural gas, or we can't do methane because too much methane in the atmosphere will screw everything up. But like steam, that's why nuclear energy is so clean, is because the only output other than power from the generation of power from a nuclear power plant is steam. Mm-hmm. It's water vapor. That's why it's so clean. But
and that's what Barrick releases all the time, because we do have a nuclear power plant, and you've seen it. You just might not have known it was there. You've probably definitely seen the heat plumes coming into my local.
Well, in Harrisburg too. We fly right past 3 Mile Island when we're on final coming up.
Yeah, and I'm not really sure where it is that power goes, but we do have a fairly large nuclear power plant that is 100% working, has been for years. Like, you still, when you move in there, the county still issues you K-tabs.
Interesting. Well, I was just thinking about it too, because we're talking about steam and water, hydroelectric power, right? Dams and stuff is considered green, which in theory it is, because all it is water turning a turbine, right? There is actually no carbon footprint per se when you're generating hydroelectric power, but environmental impacts of building the dam. You're talking about taking what would have normally been a stream, like a fish, right, and just dam it up and completely displace the environment on the downstream side of the dam. Not to mention the amount of vehicles, the amount of like the concrete and the steel and stuff required to build them. That carbon footprint that was
Mhm.
required for that. And actually just recently down, I think it's Polk County, Texas, they're issuing evacuation orders because of I think it's the rain maybe. But they're having to the dam is having to let out so much water because it's overfilling because of all the rain and stuff. They are flooding the downstream areas, the Trinity
Yeah.
River and all that sort of stuff. So they're telling people, and by the name of the estates, they sound some pretty fancy areas. They're telling them get out, where you're at very risk for high risk for flooding because of this. And that's another thing. You're displacing not only human beings, but also the animals that have then adapted to that new environment of, you know what I mean? So it's like one of those, there's tons of renewable energy, and even with the nuclear power plant, right? The amount of, to get the radio, is it uranium that they use
Mhm.
in, yeah. So uranium, you have to mine the uranium, right?
Yeah.
You have to build the stacks. You have to build the facility, which all involves a carbon footprint. So
And
like you said, I
you
think,
have to build the housing for it as well. But you just can't take a uranium rod, drop it in.
no, that's
There's
not how it
a
works.
I mean, you could, but there might be an issue, a
Yeah.
couple hours after you play around with that rod,
Yeah, and don't say it don't say it like that, Tommy.
a
Come on.
uranium rod.
Yeah, there you
Well,
go.
that's the way it is. I know for a fact down at this one and the one in Florida, they're
Yeah.
actual uranium rods. They're about
You're,
10 to 12 inches in diameter.
oh, are they? Yeah.
Mhm.
So, and that's the thing. It's a frustrating thing, and I can't. I talk about hypocrisy. Like I said, I fly jets for a living. It's probably one of the transportation makes up 28% of carbon emissions in the United States, according to the EPA. But I am part of an airline that is trying to become more sustainable. And there's things like, for example, hydrogen powered stuff. That's clean energy. Hydrogen, right? Because hydrogen, all it is just water. It's just changing the molecules of water, and then the output is just water vapor, kind
Oh,
of
so
like
it's
steam. So
biofuel.
yeah, and biofuel is actually taking the waste, right? Our waste and recycling it to power the car. So it's all natural. So there are green options out there, but right now I don't think we're more into the was it the catchphrase of the times of, oh, we're going green, we're sustainable, but I don't think we're actually realizing how much we're displacing versus
No,
actually reducing carbon
no,
emissions.
because if you went, let's say, forget the waste cooking oil that people
Hmm.
collect from restaurants and they transform it on a
Yeah,
really, really small scale. You approach a state that is known for farming corn. Okay, we
yeah,
could use the northeast corner of Pennsylvania. Every place you go within 15 minutes of where I am, even people in their own personal gardens, they have corn. Corn grows here like it's nobody's business.
yeah,
It's a great climate for that. So farmers in the Midwest have been using biofuel since the 70s and 80s. One farmer
yeah,
figured it out, and you know the vehicles do not go on public roads. They're only for use on farm, but that was one portion of farming sustainability that really, really took off. The problem isn't growing the corn to make biofuel. The problem is we don't have the refineries for it.
yeah.
So
And to build the
here you go
refineries,
again, right? Building the refineries. How are you going to run the refinery? Because you
yep.
gotta get how many cubic tons of corn per day just to run the refinery as clean
And that's
energy.
gonna be industrialized
Right.
to be
And
able
now
to
you got to
farm that.
produce.
Yeah, yeah,
So is biofuel feasible? It most certainly is. The problem is, again, you're not going to reduce it's shifting. You're not reducing your carbon footprint in the
yeah.
actual
And
generation of the fuel.
yeah, and like I said, I'm frustrated with it because, like I said, I fly airplanes, so I know I'm not doing the environment any good. It helps me sleep at night knowing I'm a part of a company that is trying to make flying more green. Um, but it's just like, would I get like on this house, we'll probably eventually get solar panels. I wasn't sure with the other house. That's why we didn't get it per se, or didn't get them over there because I wasn't sure if we were staying there or not. Here we'll probably do it in the future. I will probably get an EV when it's affordable. So for example, my next truck or my next car. Probably next fall is going to be an F-150 because of being a homeowner. There's a lot of projects and stuff I need a truck for. I did look at an F-150 Lightning, and it's not worth the price. Like if they want it, even with the credits and all that sort of stuff, it's just not worth it.
No, but let me tell you, it is comfortable to sit in.
It is, yeah. Well,
it is very, very comfortable.
Yeah, it is. So it's one of those things when it gets to a point where I can because I don't want to bankrupt my family in pursuit of going completely green.
No, I don't blame you neither. I will not own a vehicle that the payment on the vehicle is more than my rent. That just ain't happening.
That's actually a good rule of thumb. That's if it's more expensive than what you pay to live, then don't do it. But yeah, that's my point. It's just I'm frustrated because I want to do more, but also the cost of doing it is detrimental. So it'll be something I'll invest in the future as the technology becomes more available, but just being conscious of the fact that just because I'm going green doesn't mean I just offset my carbon footprint versus
that's all you're doing.
Actually doing something. So it's frustrating. It's upsetting. I'm hoping, it won't be our generation, but I'm hoping future generations to come will in fact come up with better technology and stuff to help save the planet that we live on.
Hopefully.
So before we go though, Ashley had a question that she entered late, so we're going to pull that up here real quick. Ashley said, how do you guys balance work and personal life with demanding jobs like being a pilot and EMT? So Tommy, you want to start?
It's actually a really good question, and it's not so easily answered. The first 5 or 6 years that you're working, and I'm only going to speak for my time in New York, because I know you're very familiar with that 911 system, Ash. The first 5 years of my career, there was really no work-life balance. It would be my work-life balance was really only my days off. I missed birthdays. Pretty much worked every holiday, only because I didn't have seniority. And then some of the things that you don't see behind the scenes is the days we spend away back at the academy for training that we have to go through every year. Just like Bill goes through his annual every year where he's working, but he's at his company's training facility doing training. We had to do the same thing to where we were transferred back into our academy for a week. And, here I was lined up to have a 3-day weekend, but that changed because I'm going to training. So my 3-day weekend just got wiped out because the academy is Monday to Friday. It wasn't until I got till 8.5 years on the job that I had more of an increased work-life balance. The family, like my kids grew up with my weird schedule to the point my son works the same weird schedule I do. Like my kids never knew what it was like to have a dad that was home at night. Dad was always there all day long, and they just got used to it. Literally just got used to it. That was normal in the household. The other parts, let's just say I blew a lot of vacation.
Yeah. And so as a pilot, it varies. Early on, kind of like Tommy, I worked a lot, primarily because I was trying to advance through my career. And at the time when I first started as an airline pilot, I wasn't very long, but I was single when I first started. So for me, there was nothing else to do. So I worked. I love flying. And I've always been that way, been through a bad breakup. I don't get down. I just turn around and I go work. I find something to do and keep my mind busy. So then that's how it was for my first year. And then I met my wife. We got married. Got our dogs. We didn't have our dogs. But
listen, I know how you are with your dogs. They're family.
Yeah, they're family. So it's one of those things. That's what really changed me, and I started really appreciating my time at home more than I don't say more than my career, but that's where the first time in my life where aviation kind of took the backseat to something. And so it's saying it's me time is what I say. So is consciously sitting down and going, okay, am I overwhelming myself, or just getting, a good schedule and making right career moves to ensure that I have good quality of life. And also making sure that when I'm home, I am home. So doing stuff like the podcast, streaming, gaming, doing stuff around the house, making sure that I feel like I'm home and not working. I know pilots that live in base that as soon as they're home, they're on the computer trying to figure out how to pick up premium time, right? Or overtime, trying to pick up trips to, it's a game. A lot of people, it's a game to them to see how much money they can make while living in base. With me, as soon as I'm home, that's it. I don't really worry about what's going on in Chicago. I focus on being at home, and that's what really helped me with the work-life balance is when I'm home, I'm home. I disconnect from the aviation world, and that's one thing I talked about with commuting that a lot of people are just like, I didn't really know that, commuting, like a commuting aspect that I enjoy is being able to not be in base because I can actually just literally, because I'm not there, physically disconnect from my job. I love aviation and stuff, but it's a job working for an airline, and I love aviation. I can't go long. Like I've been off for 2 weeks now, and I'm ready to get back into an airplane. So I'm glad I'm going to work tomorrow. But I take time to make sure I stay home and take time for myself, for my family, and to make sure I prioritize that over work. So excellent question. Definitely an excellent question from Ashley. But with that, folks, we are going to we'll wrap it up. Hello, Dimitri. Hello, everybody that's just jumping in. We are wrapping up the show here, and that concludes episode number 19, Green Practice or Publicity. We thank you all for joining us this week. If you enjoyed this week's show, please let us know by rating the show on the respective platform you're listening on. For Spotify users, at the top of the podcast page near the notification bell, hit the 3 dots and select Rate Show. For Apple Podcast users, scroll all the way down to the bottom of the podcast page to give your rating and review. And if you're watching us live today and would like to review the show as well, please feel free to rate the show on Spotify or Apple Podcast. Tommy and I are paying a little bit more attention nowadays to that because we got an email that in December on Apple Podcasts, we were number 58 of all aviation-related and leisure podcasts, which is huge to be the top 100 out of... there's a lot of them out there. So we're trying to work our way back up there. So if you're listening, you're watching now, go to Spotify, go to Apple Podcast, and type in Torque and Thrust Talk Show. If you type in Torque and Thrust Talk Show on Google, it's the first 25 results that pop up. And go give us a rating if you do really like the show, because we would appreciate it, and we'd like to see our ratings rise if you guys do like it. Because the more you guys like it, the higher it goes up, the more it'll get suggested, the more people be interested and get sent, I guess, or suggested this podcast to those platforms as well. If you do want to stay up to date with the show and industry news, follow us on Twitter at Torque, the letter N, Thrust TS, Torque in Thrust Talk Show. If you like to save the show on the go for entertainment and news, follow and turn on notifications for the talk show on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and iHeartRadio. Feel free to follow me and Tommy D on YouTube, Twitch, and TikTok at Captain Bill Official and at Level Flight Simulations. The next live show will be Saturday, May 11th at 10 a.m. Central, 11 a.m. Eastern. And on behalf of the Torque and Thrust Talk Show, I'm Bill.
I'm Tommy.
And we will see you all next week.